Hello, everyone. Before we dive into today's episode, I wanted to remind you that my book, Drummers on Drumming, is available now on Amazon as both a paperback and an ebook. Based on the Big Fat Five segment of this podcast, where I sit down with my favorite drummers to discuss the 5 records and stories that shaped their approach to the instrument, this book is packed with insights from the drummers who redefined how we think about the modern drum set. You can grab your copy now by checking the link in this episode's show notes or simply searching Drummers on Drumming on Amazon. So thank you for all the support, and now let's get into the show. What is up? My name is Ben Hilsinger, and thanks for hanging out with me for another episode of Big Fat 5, a podcast financially supported by Big Fat Snare Drum. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe, rate, review us, and all that jazz. It helps people find the show and makes me feel like people like me. Today's guest is Eric Slick, drummer for Dr. Dog. Eric is a great player with a modern-day Ringo-esque approach to serving the song, which is an obvious focus when you hear his drum parts that are deceivingly hard to execute well. His effortless technique is something that I've admired from afar, and I was really anxious to hear about his influences and background as a young player. In addition to his tenure in Dr. Dog and working as a drummer for many other artists, Eric is a prolific songwriter himself, releasing many albums under his own name, Eric Slick. Please enjoy my conversation with Eric as he breaks down the top 5 drumming moments that shaped his style. Cheers.
In the murmur dust of the evening, can't help but believing that flame first.
All right, I'm here with Eric Slick. Thanks for being on the show, man.
Thanks for having me, man. I'm so psyched.
So let's just get into it.
Yeah.
So the first one is When We Was Fab by George Harrison from the album Cloud 9. And it was from a second 55 to 126.
Yes.
Long time ago when we was fab, in my world you are my only love, and while you're in this world, the first gonna come and claim you.
Great tune.
Yeah. Yeah, such a good song.
Yeah, I watched this video last night. It's a fun video.
Yeah, very 80s.
Yeah.
Cloud 9, also one of the worst album covers of all time. I don't know who...
I'm gonna say that.
I don't know who instructed George to wear those, like, wraparound Oakleys with the clouds. I don't know who told him to do that. So I heard that song for the first time because my family used to go to Ocean City, New Jersey every year for vacation. It's a dry town. It's a sober town. My dad had just gotten sober, like right before I was born. Mm-hmm. So I think that record Cloud 9 came out in like 87 or 88. I was probably like 2 or 3 years old when I first heard that song, and I was very much like, I'm going to be a drummer. I'm really into drumming. My dad was playing me all this Ringo stuff, and that record in particular, I think it's Keltner and Ringo star on that record, mm-hmm. on different songs, but on that song in particular. I feel like those fills and that style of playing, that specific style of Ringo playing is like embedded in my musical DNA. Like without that song, without that record, I would not be the drummer that I am today. And I always come back to that music because like it reminds me of being on vacation with my family.
Sure.
And I feel like there's one fill in there in particular. Ringo's playing Time, and it sounds great, and it's very 80s production. They're trying to prey on people's Beatles nostalgia a little bit.
Yeah, very much, yeah.
But Ringo does, one of the got doom dun got dum dun dun. He does a very classic lyrical Ringo fill.
Yeah.
And it's funny, I was playing that song for my wife the other day and be like, this song is such a big moment in not only in my drumming life, but in my songwriting life too, because like Jeff Lynne produced it, and I love all things ELO, all things Jeff Lynne production-wise.
I saw a little Jeff Lynne cameo in that video too. A little piano and his arm keeps extending.
Jeff produced all that stuff in the late '80s. Like he was a part of the Tom Petty resurgence. He was part of the Traveling Wilburys. So those
Orbison.
records, Orbison. Those records were really big in my house. But I played that fill for Natalie, and she was like, "Oh my God, I've heard you do that fill."
Yeah, like damn it.
I know, yeah, a little bit like damn it, but also, it just felt like something that was part of my vocabulary then, and it's part of my vocabulary now on the kit. So I almost like teared up when I was listening to it the other day because I haven't seen my family in a while because of COVID. So I was like, oh, this song just gets me, man.
Well, then he also has the classic overdubbed, really loose, roomy tom, yes. Which is very
that might even
stylized.
be a timpani. Might even be, I mean, if it's Jeff Lynne, it's probably a timpani.
Sure, yeah.
But all these things, not only the drum part, but the production style of the song are things that I've returned to as a songwriter, like sort of the chunky strings, like psychedelic sound effects, kind of backward strings, backward vocals. These are all tools that I use in my own songwriting. And whether I'm conscious of it or not, I'm always coming back to that moment of hearing like Cloud 9 and the ELO stuff for the first time, for sure.
And as a kid, even though the drum part is basically the first drum part anyone learns,
yes.
It's just 1 and 3 on the kick drum.
Yes.
It's cool that as a kid you were like, that's the coolest drum part ever. I want to be a drummer now.
Definitely. And my parents also had a collection of Beatles VHS tapes. So we had Magical Mystery Tour, but we also had one called, I think, Ready, Steady, Go, which was a televised performance, like a filmed performance where I don't think the band is mimicking. I think they're actually playing, but it was a British television show, and Ringo is just crushing it on the kit. And that was my intro. I mean, drummers say this all the time. It's like either they saw Ringo on the Ed Sullivan Show in real time, or they saw him playing and they're like, I want to do that. Look at how happy he is. There's so much joy in his playing.
Yeah.
And when you're a kid, I also think somebody going like this, waving their head and smiling while they play the kit is a very attractive thing. It's not like, some like person looking miserable playing. Like when you're a kid, you want to see smiling faces.
Sure.
So seeing that Ready, Steady, Go was the thing that really solidified, like, I want to be a drummer 100%. Like, there was never a question in my mind that I was going to go down some other path, like accountant or, it was just like, I'm going to do Ringo. I'm going to be Ringo.
Yeah. Do you ever get embarrassed when someone asks you the reason you play drums and you say Ringo? Because to me,
Yes.
I'm always like, don't roll your eyes. You actually don't know how perfect of an answer this is, but it's Ringo,
Of course. Well, I mean, I also think that we have other Ringos by the decades, like Questlove is the modern day Ringo, like when you're going to ask different generations what these important drummers were, like, we're all going to have our Ringo because there always seems to be a drummer that like encapsulates the time, right?
Sure.
And like Ringo definitely encapsulates a lot of that era, and he was also very straightforward and very melodic and very like unprecedented as a drummer, really. Like someone play he is his own thing. I was watching the video of them performing Don't Let Me Down on the Let It Be rooftop. Sure. And I never realized that the choruses are just 4 crashes. He goes, pa, 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 pa. It's like, who would ever do that at the top of a chorus? Would you do that? Would you, like,
no.
If someone brought you a song like Don't Let Me Down, you'd probably go, you'd probably do like a cymbal and then snare hit, maybe a tom fill to go back into the verse. But he goes, psh, 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 psh. And I was like, that's Ringo. It's its own melodic piece right there. And then as far as feeling like ashamed about it, I think that we all need to get rid of our our shame about stuff like that, because I mean, I love Ringo Starr just like I love like J-Lo's Waiting for Tonight. Like
sure.
Like Waiting for Tonight is an incredible song, but I can hold these two thoughts in my brain at the same time,
Yeah, I guess it's not so much a shame from me. It's like when someone asks me what my favorite drummer is or whatever, and I want to give them some obscure answer where they're like, "Oh, you're a cool guy."
Of course.
But it's like, no, it is Ringo, and but I know you probably heard that from every other drummer, but it's because, it's Ringo.
It's Ringo, and you hear it at a young age, whether, like maybe your parents are Beatles fans, maybe they're into that style of music, and they play a lot around the house. So you're processing it whether you're aware of it or not.
Yeah.
And so we have that like nostalgic feeling when we hear Ringo too, right? It's like you hear Ticket to Ride and you're like, childhood.
Oh my gosh. That album, Help, is one of my favorite sounding drums because they're still wide open.
Yes, it's before the tea towels. Yeah,
the snare drum on that record is so snappy and so perfect.
That's ironic for a guy who makes muffling products to love.
I know. We'll edit this out. Yeah. Well, speaking of Ringo, I know we could have a whole episode just talking about that. I did want to say, watching some videos of you in Dr. Dog, there's a live video of you at KXP. You're playing Over Here, Over There. Mm-hmm. And on the record, it's not so much, you're not as busy on the hi-hat, but you're doing a and it reminds me of the beat, speaking of Help, the song Act Naturally.
Yeah.
And it's kind of this bastardized, it's not straight, it's not swung. It's very like, in the 50s when rock and roll didn't know what it was doing yet. But that feel on the hi-hat is super fast, but still getting that kind of syncopated thing is very difficult. And so I applauded you because you do it the whole song, and I'm like, that's hard.
It's really hard, yeah. Well, I was thinking about sort of like, like skiffle beats, or like, there's also a song on the Traveling Wilburys record called, what is it called? I think it's called She Loves You, or She Loves Your, I can't remember the name of the song, but Keltner does that style of beat. And I'd always been like, oh man, he's definitely calling back to like the Carl Perkins era of that half swung hi-hat feel. So when we did the recorded version of Over Here, Over There, the instruction was more like Lust for Life, or like boom ka boom ka boom,
Sure.
the Jet song,
totally.
whatever your reference point is. That was the initial version of that song. It was a little bit more manic on the recorded version, but then live, Scott wanted to turn it back into like a country tune, which I think was the original intent. But I don't have a very wide vocabulary of like country, so I was like, I'll just do I'll do the Act Naturally beat, because that's one of Ringo's country tunes. Sure, I'll just do that. My hi-hat technique is definitely, you said bastardized, but like it's definitely like a mixture of like watching the James Gadsden instructional video hundreds of times, watching like old Stuart Copeland footage, and then like Ringo or something. Like it's some like weird melting pot of those for sure.
Yeah, speaking of Gadsden, that's the Nelson Drum Shop always has those hats with the drummers, and mine says Gadsden. So
good choice.
I agree with you on that.
Oh man, the Kissing My Love video that's on YouTube of them performing that in like 1973 is it's the baddest hi-hat work that's out there. And he's got like the gold teeth and everything. It's just like it's lovely. But that's not my big fat five. I love that video, but not my big fat five.
And I will say that you were very adamant that it had to be in order.
Yes.
So this is chronological as well. Speaking of, let's go to number 2, which is Bill Bruford from Bruford and the Beat, which is more of an instructional. It's like a curation of interviews and instructional stuff he did. And it's minute 140 to 226. Mm-hmm. So let me let's drop in the audio.
Let's cue it up.
There you go.
Yeah. So I legitimately watched that drum video every single morning before I went to school. This was before YouTube. Mm-hmm. This was not even a DVD. This was a VHS tape of Bruford and the Beat. I had this tiny, like 13-inch television in my bedroom, and I would watch it every single day. I was obsessed with it. And this was around the time I was like 13 years old, 13 or 14. I was really into all things King Crimson, Yes, progressive rock, and I was like, wouldn't it be great if Bill Bruford had an instructional video? Because I had been to Guitar Center and seen like the Neil Peart one. I'd seen like Mike Portnoy, and those weren't for me. I was like, even though I'm a prog lover, like those videos were not for me.
Yeah.
I was like, and I also have always had this weird penchant for like older things. Like I've always been more attracted to the retro stuff. So when I found out there was a Bill Bruford drum video, and then I could order it from Interstate Music. Did you ever get those catalogs like Casio Interstate Music?
Oh yeah.
So I got an Interstate Music catalog, and they're like, we have the repressing of the Bruford and the Beat VHS tape, and it was produced by Max Roach. Fun fact.
Oh really?
Max Roach and Bill Bruford were buddies, and the Max Roach instructional video, which isn't so much an instructional video as much as it's a performance video, it's amazing. But they had produced those videos in the same sitting, so they have a lot of the same backgrounds and stuff.
That's rad.
But that video was my like visual introduction to 80s King Crimson, which was the band that had Bill Bruford, Robert Fripp, Tony Levin, and Adrian Belew. And I listened to that every single day. And the way that he's playing, the reason it was so influential for me is because I loved that he didn't have any traditional cymbals. Was already getting tired of like traditional cymbal sounds. He had no hi-hat in that video. I don't know if you noticed. There's no hi-hat. Everything's been replaced with Simmons pads and octobans and that extremely ringy snare. That is totally singular to him. So I used to tune my snare drum. My dad bought me a Pearl Sensitone snare drum, and I would like crank it and try to make it sound as much like Bill Bruford as possible. I went on eBay. I bought Simmons pads. I bought a Simmons SDS-8. I tuned all of the Simmons to notes so I could play like marimba patterns on it. Like I was an extremely dorky 13-year-old kid. That was my interest at that time. I was like, I just want to play exactly like Bill Bruford plays in that particular part of the video.
Yeah.
And I also just loved that he was like not doing typical triplet patterns, because at that point I had been doing the Jim Chapin book, and like everything was triplet, but he was like doing quintuplet voicings, like doing these fives in there, and I was like, that's really cool.
Yeah.
And also, you mentioned this, but he looks so relaxed, and I was like, that's the way I want to play. I want to have good posture, I want to be relaxed, and I want to like approach the kit from a more painterly perspective, if that makes sense.
You definitely do. I mean, watching your videos, I have piss poor posture. So whenever I see a drummer, I lock in. I'm just like, God, you're going to be able to do this for a career now.
Oh, well, thanks. Well, I did yoga for a long time.
You ate yogurt for a year, yeah.
I ate yogurt for a long time.
Congrats.
But that really helped instill good posture. And then I also had, like, if I did slouch, I would really feel it the next day. Like, even on tour, I was noticing that, like, if I was starting to crouch and do the Buddy Rich thing, like, I'd be paying for it the next day. So Bruford, so I listened to, there's like a trilogy of 80s Crimson records, and I listened to them every day for a couple years.
Yeah.
Discipline, it's called Discipline, then Beat, and then Three of a Perfect Pair. And then when I was 18, I got that was my first touring gig, was playing with Adrian Belew. So it just felt like a real, full circle moment for sure.
Do you still have the Simmons pads?
I do.
Are they, I mean, I've never played them myself. Are they cool? Would you recommend people messing around with them?
Well, I mean, the pads themselves are pretty, they don't necessarily feel that great. I think they called them riot shield material. Like, people got like severe carpal tunnel from those things.
Oh, wow.
But the Brain, like the SDS-8, the SDS-5 have so much cool stuff you can do with them. They've now become ludicrously expensive. When I bought mine, I think it was like $50. Yeah, Joey Waronker was touring with Simmons a couple years ago with Atoms for Peace. He had like a full Simmons setup.
That's rad. All right, so number 3 is Inca Roads by Frank Zappa from the album A Token of His Extreme Live, and that is the great Chester Thompson on drums.
Oh my God, yeah.
You said, basically, yeah, his whole performance is bonkers, but let's just go minute 8:01 to the end of this song. and then we'll discuss.
Just a little paralysis.
Was she running? Did she have a motor?
Or was she something different?
Guacamole queen.
Guacamole queen.
Guacamole queen.
At the Armadillo in Austin, Texas. Or did someone build a place or leave a space for Chester's thing to land? Chester's thing. En route.
Did a booger bear come from somewhere out there? Did a booger bear come from somewhere out there? Did the Indians first on the bell? Rock up the hill.
That's so cool.
It's insane. So that singer is a guy named Napoleon Murphy Brock, the guy with the red shirt and the white pants. Mm-hmm. I started touring with him when I was 17 years old, playing that music. And
whoa,
what a crazy learning experience. So that song in particular still stays with me. It's a very long song. It's like a 9-minute tune. And that particular section is a keyboard solo by George Duke, and Chester Thompson is playing a beat that like I had never even thought was playable or fathomable. Like, and I still can't really play it right because it's so fast and it's just so like articulate and breakneck, but it also grooves really hard. Chester is kind of the ultimate Zappa drummer to me because he can really do it all. He can play all of the hard, complicated multimeter stuff, and then he can also just like groove so hard. Mm-hmm. And then it goes into septuplets of just like the Ludwig octuplus toms and Ruth Underwood playing marimba in unison. Again, I don't think I'd ever played that section 100% correct because it's incredible. And then it like kind of ends on this silly, almost like Looney Tunes Spike Jones ending.
Yeah.
But my time in this, I toured in a Frank Zappa band called Project Object, which was Napoleon Murphy Brock, that singer, a guy named Ike Willis, who sang on a record called Joe's Garage, a marimba player named Ed Mann, who was the longest tenured marimba vibraphonist with Zappa, and then Don Preston, who was the original keyboardist of the Mothers of Invention, the very first Zappa band. And I mean, I was so young and so green and had never toured before, and these guys were basically like teaching me how to tour and play that material every night. And we would rehearse for like 3 hours before every show. We'd play 3 hours every night. It was like paying your dues to the extreme.
How'd you get that gig at such a young age?
So I came from like a music program in Philadelphia that specialized in Zappa music, which was also weird. So like all the old Zappa guys would come through and visit and do like master classes at the school, and they found out I was like the nerdy little hotshot butthead kid, and I sat in with them a couple times when they came through Philly, and they had another drummer who was great, but he eventually left, and then I got the call, and this was also a year after I dropped out of jazz school. So my parents were really bummed out that I dropped out of college, and they were like, if you don't, get a job soon, like, you're going to have to go back to school, or you're going to have to figure something out. So, like, right, like, at the tail end of the year that I dropped out, I got the call. And so we went on tour, and it was, like, a life-changing experience. I mean, and then I toured with them for 3 years prior to Dr. Dog. And every night was... I would best describe Napoleon as, like, the most kind but, like, particular band leader. So, like, if if things weren't exactly right, because he played in Zappa's band for a very long time, if things weren't exactly right, he would let me know without apology, you know? And at times it was hard for my young ego, but like those moments were so crucial to my development as a musician, and I got to learn so much from them. And just like having the bar be really high every single night. And also the crowd for those Zappa shows is so discerning too, because they're really familiar with the material. It's almost like they're almost like Trekkies. Like if you don't do it, or if you don't, or better yet, even more like Deadheads, where like they can tell you, oh, I see what you did there with that. You did the 1973 version of that song, and then you went into the 1988 version of that song, and you're like, the fact that you know that is crazy. So it taught me a lot about putting the ego aside and learning how to just play the music as it's written, you know?
That's immeasurable as a young kid, you know?
Yeah,
that's
everything.
I
mean, and then the paying my dues part was that, you know, Zappa is not the most popular music in the world. And, you know, I've played to like 9 people in Kalamazoo, you know, on those tours, you know. You're playing for 3 hours to potentially 20 people. And then when you get to a major city, you're playing to 400 people. So it was very like up and down. It was a good way of like kicking you in the butt, because you're like, yeah, we just played to 400 people playing like the craziest music ever written. And then like the next night you're like, you know, eating a sad hot dog and it's like a blizzard, and you're like, why am I doing this? And I think every musician who has a career or, you know, is in it for a long time can relate to that.
Oh yeah, I still can.
Yeah, me too. No, me too. I mean, there's times with Dr. Dog where we're like, we play some festival and we're like, wow, that was incredible. And then like the next night you're like, oh God, where are we? What is this town? Why are we playing here today? You know, and the crowd seems really off. Everything seems wrong. You know, it never goes away.
Yeah, it was funny. It was last summer with Eve 6. It was somewhere in Tennessee. And it was this tribe's first venture into like a summer festival for their little area, and they just didn't promote it well at all. And they brought Eve 6, and we were the headliner, and we played for 5 people. They brought in a whole crew, probably spent $20,000 on sound, because they thought it was going to be this easy thing, and they just didn't promote it right, and it was laughable.
Dude, we played a show that had 3,000 tickets sold, 5,000 tickets given away, 100 people showed up, and we were opening for Kevin Costner.
What?
Yeah.
Does he have like a alternative band? I didn't know he was a musician.
He has a band, and like all of the music is about Waterworld, and it was so.
Is it a troll or is it?
I don't know. Look,
that sounds awesome.
I don't know if this is appropriate for the podcast, but
okay.
I have not done many drugs in my life. I don't really drink. I wouldn't say that I'm straight edge, but I'm like vegetarian, and I live a very healthy lifestyle on tour. Yeah. But this night in particular, our tour manager was like, hey, I got my hands on some mushrooms. Would you like to take one mushroom? And I was like, you know what? I'm like locked at this festival, and like I'm going to go see Kevin Costner. I'll take a mushroom. And so I did. And I watched the Kevin Costner set on mushrooms and laughed the entire time. And then I went back to the tour bus, and I turned on the television, and Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves was on, and I screamed. Because I thought
joy or fright?
It was a mixture of the two. But there were so many details of that night that were hilarious, but those were the most important to me. But yeah, that's the last time I've ever done a psychedelic. And Kevin Costner, if you're listening, thank you for a wonderful show.
I guarantee he would love that story if he heard that.
Yeah, I mean, the first 2 songs were great, as far as I can remember. But then some other bands played too, like Sixpence None the Richer played, and Soul Asylum played. I mean, it was a weird one. But yeah, this was right after the BP spill, and the show was in the Gulf Shores. So people, I think, were just like not coming because they were upset. They were like, if BP's putting on this show, like we're not going to go to it. It was a little fire festy that night for sure. There was some white bread with American cheese backstage.
Yeah. Hey guys, we'll be right back with the show, but I wanted to talk real quick about Waves Audio. I use an endless amount of their plugins, including the vocal writer for this podcast, and for my drumming, I use the SSL channel, Abbey Road Saturator, CLA drums for that easy, quick, polished sound, and many, many more. We're an affiliate member, and if this show brings you any sort of value, please click the link in the show notes to make your next purchase. It supports me directly and helps keep the show going. So, all right, now back to the top 5 ways to make soup. I will say real quick, kind of with the Bruford tie-in, that I was watching some Chester last night, playing with Phil Collins, who Bill also did, and
Yes.
I think the song "Take Me Home" live from a 1990 performance has Chester doing, I mean, it's ultimately Phil's drum part, but he's doing these fills over the bar line, crashing on the china, very Lars Ulrich thing to do as well. But just those fills over the bar line, I really appreciated in that performance, and Chester just killed it, you know.
Dude, I mean, Phil is such I feel that Phil Collins is underrated.
I agree. I know what you mean by the way you kind of said that. You're like, it's weird to say that, but I do know what you mean.
I think he's underrated. I think his drum tone is incredible. Like his Gretsch drum tone was so copied. And I think it's a testament to Chester that Chester could rise to the occasion and not only play Phil's part, but like make it his own thing and make it like even more incredible. Like they have a deep respect for each other, which I think is like awesome. That's drummers are like that though. You know, it's like drummers are so familial in a lot of ways. Like I don't think that there's a lot of room for competition in the drum world. So when I see like Chester and Phil, I'm like, yes, that's like the perfect example of the camaraderie that exists with drummers.
I agree. It's rare, it's very rare that you see a drummer who's like, this is my lick, don't use it. When guitarists and stuff are kind of like, this is my style, don't, as Daru say, don't bite off me. But he was just on the podcast. But yeah, it's such a giving atmosphere. I love drummers.
Definitely. And I think that there's just, our personality types are more towards the like comedian mediator types. Like we're often trying to diffuse situations between band members, you know? So like, and we're also usually like the ear that people lean on. Yeah. So I don't think there's much room for like, you know, I'm the fastest gun in the West or whatever. Like I can learn something new from every drummer that I watch, whether it's like a drummer playing with a kick snare and like a shaker. Yeah. I'm like, that's amazing. Like that can be the most transcendent thing in the world. Even though I love all these like hot licks that I'm making you play. Like
yeah.
Well, yeah. So anyway, yeah, we can move on to the next one.
All right. So it's going to be Ella Guru by Captain Beefheart from the album Dichotomy. And this is John French, a.k.a. Drumbo, on the drums.
Yeah. It's actually from the album Trout Mask Replica.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Dichotomy might be like a compilation, but Trout Mask Replica is definitely the record that I want to talk about.
Okay, cool. Let's click on that. It's going to be a second 7 to second 53.
Now here she come walking, looking like a zoo. Hi Ella Guru. She know all the colors that nature do. Hi Ella Guru. Hi yellow, hi red, hi blue, she blew. Hi Ella Guru. She do what she mean and she do what she do. Got something for me, got something for you. She shows something.
Yeah, so I bought that record for $5 in Fort Collins, Colorado when I was like 18 years old. And people have been telling me, you're going to love Captain Beefheart, like it's Zappa adjacent. And I didn't really know what to expect, but I had it on CD, I plopped it into my Discman, and I was like, what the hell is this? This is like garbage. Like what? I don't understand what's happening. But as the record progressed, it's a pretty long record. It's a double album, and it's like pretty sprawling and weird. And as the record played on, I was like, wait, this is they are meaning to play like this, and the drums are immaculately composed, and the guitars are all composed. This isn't just like free playing. This is like. This was labored over. And then I got obsessed with the concept that you could labor over something that sounds so chaotic. And Drumbo, the drummer, his name is John French, his playing was almost like a combination of like Ringo and Joe Morello, but also like the drummer with Ornette Coleman, not Donardo Coleman, but Ed Blackwell, like a little bit like Ed Blackwell. And I was just like, what is this mixture of all these different styles of drumming? Like, what is happening with this music? And so I just sat down and started transcribing all the drum parts from that record. And weirdly, like in the same way that I became the Zappa aficionado, I became a Beefheart aficionado. But the thing about Beefheart that spoke to me potentially even more than Zappa was that it was so visceral. Like Zappa's music is very, you could chart it out. You could sit down and you could, take a ruler and mark out all the, septuplets, 11 tuplets, 19/16. You could do all these crazy bars and figure it out. But with Beefheart, so much of it was the intensity and the intent behind what they were playing that made it feel so dangerous and so like rock and roll, like true raw artist rock and roll. So that record completely blew my mind open, changed my life. And when I joined Dr. Dog, I found out that all those guys were also Captain Beefheart fanatics, and they knew all the stuff. They knew it really well. So it was a nice like bonding experience that we could all like. We're all into this super weird Captain Beefheart music, like really angular guitars, really dead sounding drums. Captain Beefheart insisted upon putting cardboard all over the drum kit, so that's why the drums sound like that. He was
okay.
He was like, drums shouldn't ring out. They need to sound like you're getting punched in the face. So you just like on the day of the recording session, without telling the drummer, you just threw cardboard.
He should have put a big fat snare drum on there. Know what I mean? And that's it, folks. We're done.
If you had invented it in 1968,
yeah,
you would have predicted decades of drum muffling.
My God, we would have. Yeah. Well, we can just go back in time and sue them with the patent, so it's fine.
Yeah, in a way, maybe Captain Beefheart invented the big fat snare drum. He.
If that's part of our story, that's part of our story, and I'm not upset at that.
But I've never. Whenever I find somebody who likes Captain Beefheart, and in particular the records Trout Mask Replica and Lick My Decals Off, I hold on to them for dear life because I'm like, you get it. You get this very particular part of my personality, and we are family from this point on. I hold those people very near and dear to my heart.
That section, right as you stopped it, it kind of goes into a more traditional, I didn't hear the whole song, but it kind of goes into a more traditional kind of train beat almost. Mm-hmm. So it's cool that when you set up chaos, it kind of makes those payoffs even better.
Right. And I think that was how I learned that the music was through composed for that record. Because without those moments of them all locking in together on something, mm-hmm. It just sounds like, all right, play free for 5 bars and then play free for this many. But you realize that they really labored over that material for 9 months and mm-hmm. transcribed all of it. But it's not really transcribable. I've played Beefheart music with other people, and we get close, but it doesn't have the same ferocity that record has behind it, because they were like young and starving. They had like no money from Warner Brothers to make that record, and it just sounds like it was created in a vacuum. It sounds like it was the record exists, and there's like nothing else that can penetrate it in a way. And I just found it like fascinating, and it's been an inspiration. Whenever I feel uninspired, I'll put on Captain Beefheart and listen to those records and remember that like doing something that you believe in and doing something kind of raw and doing your best to be an artist is like the way to go. Why compromise your vision?
Yeah.
That was sort of what I learned from that.
And yeah, I to reference something that one of your band members in Dr. Dog, I think both of them, it was an interview, they were talking about just getting in kind of a zone of what you have for that record and how fidelity is so subjective. Sometimes with these lo-fi kind of cool stuff, you lose something if you would have recorded it super well. And so a lot of that stuff from Captain Beefheart, it's just like, it's totally a vibe. I know I overuse that phrase a lot, but it's a vibe.
It is. No, it's 100% a vibe. And like, I think I love when American music is weird. Because I think that's the truest American music. When I hear like, Harry Partch or like microtonal marimba music from the 30s, I'm like, that's American music. When I hear like R.L. Burnside play slide blues guitar and he's playing all these notes that sound like he has like 10 fingers, I'm like, that's real American music. Like that's what inspires me, not like the idea of sort of like the factory farm version of American music. Like the raw sort of visceral thing is how I view America.
Well, speaking of weird in a great way, your solo project, you are very focused on visuals as an extension of your music. Like I love your videos I wrote them down, Nothing Is Real, Closer to Heaven, Over It. Do you feel a little bit of that Beefheart vibe and making the music has translated to how you express yourself during in a video?
Absolutely. And I think as time has gone on, I'm trying to find ways to link them better and make them more effective. But like, I'm very influenced by Twin Peaks and David Lynch, but I'm also really influenced by like Billy Madison. So like wherever the cross section of those two things are is where I try to land. And like the video for Nothing Is Real, I just taught myself CGI when I was on tour. And like,
so that was you?
Yeah, I made that video, yeah.
I love that video, man. It's so creepy and so haunting. It's so cool, man.
Thanks. Yeah, I was like really into this thing called Cool 3D World. It's these two artists from Philadelphia who make like really absurdist CGI. And I reached out to them if they would do a video for me, and they said no. And so I tried to make lemonade out of lemons, and was like, maybe I could just do my own CGI video. So I just started teaching myself how to do it. And I think that's how I do a lot of things. Like, I don't, I've taken lessons with people, but like I try to filter it through my own DIY kind of nature of like, well, how would I do it? What's the best way for me to approach this? So yeah, man, for sure.
Yeah, definitely check out that video. And then also I know Closer to Heaven, your expressions in that song or in that video are very funny. You're a good actor as well.
Oh, thanks, man. Well, my friend Jaff filmed it, and my wife's in that video, and like we just wanted to have so much fun because we've been having such a bad year. We were like, we have an opportunity to make a video. Let's just have as much fun as humanly possible. And it is, I sent him a bunch of reference points, and I was like, let's go David Lynch, let's go sort of like Shock the Monkey, Peter Gabriel, but then let's also go slapstick and have my wife dress up as we bought a Japanese mascot costume from Japan, and it shipped in time. I don't know. I guess like because of COVID, but like the mascot people were like super responsive. They're like, yes, we will make you a tennis ball mascot. It'll take us 2 days, but we can make it and we'll send it to you. And when we got it in the mail, like Natalie, my wife, and I, we just cracked up. Like we were dying. So she's the tennis ball in the video.
That's funny.
She's the tennis ball, and she's also the ghost aura in the video.
That's awesome. Yeah, please, guys, I'll put a link in the show notes, but go check out Eric's solo stuff, music, and the videos as well, which is what we're referencing.
Yes.
So, all right, number 5. Here
we are.
Yep, there you go. You can actually introduce it if you'd like. I know I've been kind of taking the reins on it, but...
No, it's okay, and this is why I wanted to be chronological. So when I was 20 years old, my friend Dave Drywitz, he plays bass in the band Ween, and we were talking one day. We had a band together called Crescent Moon that was just bass and drums. We played some shows. It was really fun, and I was like, man, I really want to get my technique in order. Like, I feel like my I used to hold my sticks really tight, and I used to hold them in my forefinger, and I'd get blisters all the time, and I'd break drum heads, break sticks, break cymbals. And he was like, you should really study with this guy, Kenwood Denard, up at Berkeley. You should take some lessons with him. He played with Jaco Pastorius. His technique is the best I've ever seen. And so I started studying with Kenwood Denard, which was amazing. I don't know if you know about Kenwood, but like, he was one of the first dudes to play synthesizer and drums at the same time and sing. His teacher was Alan Dawson, and Alan Dawson taught Tony Williams and Steve Smith, Vinnie Colaiuta, a lot of important drummers. And he hipped me to this Tony Williams clinic from 1985, Zildjian Day festival. I think Buddy Rich introduces Tony Williams in this video. Tony's wearing OR scrubs, and I had heard Tony Williams before. Like, I was a fan of his work on Miles Smiles. I was a fan of his work on Eric Dolphy's Out to Lunch. These were all things I had learned in jazz school. But this particular video, and the section that I've isolated, is one of the most beautiful displays of technique I've ever seen in my entire life, and it completely radicalized how I view drumming technique. He uses his middle finger as the fulcrum, and he uses his back fingers as a support, and his forefinger is almost a guide, but I just felt like his playing was so present and loud and articulate, and he's just doing, the beginning of the solo is just 3 minutes of a double stroke roll going into Swiss triplets and flam accents. And he's showing you that the double stroke, when you break it all apart, is all of these things. And I just thought that was incredible. So whenever I feel like lost in my technique, I just watch this video, in particular this section. And it's like, his playing is like butter. I mean, it's incredible. He invented a technique.
Sure. Yeah, let's drop it in real quick, and then we can keep talking about it.
Totally insane. So yeah, he's just doing a double stroke, and like, I think that like all the drum videos I had seen up until that point, they start with some motif on the kit, and then it like the drummer's just, it's all fireworks, and it's all just like blah 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 blah, filling up space, and I was tired of seeing that. And there was just something so refreshing and also so zen about watching somebody perfectly execute a double stroke roll for that long without like really hesitating or struggling. Like, he looks like just very relaxed.
Yeah.
And around that same time, I had also gotten really into that Jojo Mayer video, Secret Weapons for the Modern Drummer. Yep. And I felt like the things I was learning in that video, I could then apply to that Tony video, and then look at my own hands and be like, well, wow, like my fulcrum is completely closed. How do I hold the sticks looser? And Kenwood, my teacher, was also very instrumental in being like, why are you rushing through everything? Loosen up. Your fulcrum, you should hold the sticks in a different place. Be more intentional. Funny story, Kenwood would often haze me about stuff. And one month he was like, you're going to learn the tempo 1/16. And you're going to live and breathe 1/16 for 3 months. And when you're done with that, come back to me, and we're going to play 1/16. Just quarter notes at 1/16 together. And I was like, okay. So I like slept with the metronome on. I went crazy. Like, I did 1/16. Really? Yes, I went 1/16 bonkers. And then I went back up to Boston. I was living in Philadelphia at the time. Drove up to Boston, had my lesson with Kenwood. And he's like, all right, here we go, 1/16, let's do it. And he puts the click on, and we do 1/16, and I'm playing along with it. And I close my eyes, and I'm like, oh man, I'm nailing it. This is great. And then suddenly, like, everything sounds completely off, and I'm like, totally disoriented. And I look up at Kenwood, and I'm like, I put my sticks down. I'm like, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. I have been working on this really hard. He's like, I just slowed the metronome down. Your next lesson is confidence.
That's awesome.
Which was a really important lesson. He was like, no, you got this. You have to know that you worked really hard on this, and now the second step is being able to own up to it and be like, no, I've got this, It was nerve-wracking. He would just type on his computer the whole time while I was playing, and he'd be like, and then he'd hand me the paper afterwards and be like, you were sloppy in measure 6, you were sloppy in measure 11, lagging here, It was a very kind and organized way to tell me that I had a lot to work on and a lot of holes in my playing. But he also played with Maceo Parker and James Brown, so he came from that school of thought, kind of similar to Zappa, where it was no, nothing less than excellence will be accepted.
Was there? Did he explain why he did 116?
I think he just probably picked it at random. He was almost like a trickster in that way.
Okay.
He might have just been messing with me, because he knew that I was eager and that I was going to practice it and that I was going to drive myself insane, in front of the mirror with my hands doing the proper technique that I had just learned. He knew I was going to take it way too far and potentially bypass the confidence building part of it.
Yeah. I asked because there is that kind of purgatory, if you will, of tempos where you can't rely off each individual stroke for doubles, but it's not fast enough to rely off the rebound. So there is that kind of middle ground of it's this weird in between.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that I had always been mystified by the double stroke roll, and I had never had such a I've had great teachers in my life, but Kenwood really laid it out for me in a way that I could understand. And then the fact that he was referencing me to Tony and Jojo Mayer I'm a visual learner, and so to be able to see those things and then apply them to my own playing was huge. It was totally huge, and it really helped me. And I stopped breaking sticks. I stopped breaking heads. I just, really wasn't breaking cymbals anymore. My technique totally changed, and our front of house engineers were like, yeah, I can actually hear you now. You're not laying into the drums, you're letting the drums breathe, and it's translating, they're projecting differently. That's when I learned about that drums project differently than the way that you hear them in front of you. Mm-hmm. And I really didn't know that. I would tune my snare super low and get an 8x14 snare drum, and it would be a big fat diaper sound, and then but then the crowd never heard it. It was too low. You have to figure out where the drum speaks and why certain heads work the way that they work and why certain shell composites work the way that they work. I just didn't know any of that. I was just I'll get a big snare drum. It's gonna sound huge, and then it didn't. It actually sounded teeny tiny.
And I'm sorry, you might have already said this, but how old were you when you started taking lessons from him?
I was 20 years old. I was right on the cusp of joining Dr. Dog. I joined when I was 22. No, and that was a whole learning experience in and of itself. It's a whole different skill set to play in a band like Dr. Dog than it was to play all of this technically demanding stuff. Just so much different.
I asked because I'm 33 right now, and I've taken lessons somewhat recently from Dave Village, from Bruce Becker, who was kind of the apprentice to Freddie Gruber. Because I'm similar to you, I kind of grew up kind of my own technique, doing my own thing, and so I would consider myself, still to this day, having kind of piss poor technique, more so relying on the theatrics of, looking the part as opposed, looking like Dave Grohl as opposed to actually sitting there like you do with proper technique, proper posture, and just relying on that. And so whenever I try and really lean into what they've taught me, I feel like it's the first day I'm on the drum set, and it's so nerve-wracking because I have to take a step back for minimum 6 months before I can even start applying this in a really confident way.
Dude, it takes so long. And when I was studying with Kenwood, I would get so frustrated because I'd hear a board recording of a show, and I'm just oh my god, when am I ever going to reach that point where I sound the way I want to sound? And then that didn't go away, and in a way it never goes away. you referenced that KEXP video, and I can't even watch that video because I'm like, I played like crap at that.
Oh, you're
day.
crazy! I was gonna reference how amazing you sounded, like tonally too.
No. I was like, I played like crap. I was tired. I look tired. But I think the fact that first of all, you're a great drummer. Like, I've seen you play before. You're a great drummer. I wouldn't call it piss poor technique, but you're humble. And that is a key ingredient to progressing. And I think that if we were to walk into a room and think that we were all hot shit all the time, like, it's just not conducive to growth. And like, you should always be judging your playing and saying this could be better, because then you're actually going to get better. There's going to be a day when you wake up and you play an Eve 6 song. Maybe you play Inside Out and it's the best you've ever played it.
Yeah.
And you're like, man, it feels so good to play this song today, and I've nailed it. And then the next day, it's not going to feel like that,
Exactly.
So, and then you'll be like, I got to grow even more. I'm going to find this other thing, Very rarely do I go back and hear a recording from a couple of years ago, and I'm like, man, I really nailed it. Like, there's always something to pick out, and Jim Keltner touches on that in that Drum Doctors video. He says the same thing. He's like, I can't even listen to some of the stuff I've done, like with Ry Cooder. Like, oh God, I sound terrible. Oh my gosh,
yeah.
But you're like, what? It's like, that's the greasiest pocket playing ever, or whatever it is. So I totally understand where you're coming from, and it's beautiful that you are still learning. Like, I haven't taken a lesson in a while. I'm sure I would benefit from a lesson with Dave Elitch or the other guy you mentioned.
Yeah. All right, well, that's the 5. So, I really want people to find more of your stuff outside of Dr. Dog as well. So can you do a little self-promotion? Speaking of being humble, but can you talk about your solo stuff a little bit and where people can find it?
Yeah, I have a new album called Wiseacre. It came out in August, and you can find it on Bandcamp, Spotify. Let's get those Spotify streaming numbers up. I've got to get those. I got to get those fractions of a penny, but let's do it. And we're all sold out of vinyl for now, but there will certainly be more in the future. So just keep your eyes peeled and go to my Instagram. It's called Strange America. There you go.
Well, thanks for being on the show, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Ben. This was a true pleasure.
Agreed. All right, man. Have a good one.
You too.
And that's the show. Be sure to check out bigfatsnaredrum.com and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at bigfatsnaredrum. The audio you're hearing was edited in part by Isotope RX8 Audio Editor, so go check that out at isotope.com. Cheers.